There's a man you fear, not because he shouts, not because he strikes, but because he doesn't flinch when you leave. He doesn't chase. He doesn't explain. He doesn't beg for closeness, for validation, for belonging. And somewhere deep inside you, something twists. Because in a world addicted to attention, to affirmation, to needing someone, you've just met the rarest breed of human alive. The one who doesn't need you. And that is terrifying. Because we've all been trained to believe that power is noise. That the loudest man in the room holds the throne. But Nietzsche whispered something darker. Something far more dangerous. He said, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." Now tell me, what happens when you stop needing everyone's wings? This isn't just philosophy. It's warfare. You've been conditioned to chase approval like oxygen. You've been trained to equate your worth with how wanted you are. But there's a kind of man who slipped through the cracks. Who stopped measuring himself by how others see him. And when he walks into a room, he bends the gravity. Not with charm. Not with noise. But with absence. He doesn't need you. And that makes him impossible to manipulate. Because here's the first forbidden truth. Neediness is the leash they use to drag your soul. Think about every time you gave too much, said too little, stayed too long, because you were afraid to lose someone. Not because they earned it, but because you thought without them you'd collapse. You weren't weak. You were wired that way. Since childhood, they've taught you to confuse obedience with love. Dependence with loyalty. They told you being alone was shameful, unnatural, broken. And you believed it, until your hands were bleeding from trying to hold people who were never holding you back. But the man who doesn't need anyone, he broke that code. And that's why he's dangerous. Because the system can't shame him. Guilt doesn't work. Silence doesn't punish him. He's immune to the manipulation that controls 99% of the population. He's not heartless. He just owns his own oxygen tank. He walks away not to punish, but because he knows the difference between connection and containment. And when someone tries to cage his spirit, he vanishes like smoke. Now here's the second dark insight Nietzsche knew. The more detached you are, the more they attach. That's the paradox. We chase what runs. We worship what doesn't care. We fall hardest for the ones we can't control. So when a man radiates complete self-sufficiency, people can't look away. It's not arrogance. It's not manipulation. It's the terrifying energy of someone who has nothing to prove. He's not chasing status. He's not trying to impress. He's not dancing for attention. And because of that, people give him everything. Respect, fear, obsession. And why? Because most of society is emotionally starving. They are ruled by dopamine hits, validation loops, likes, shares, and empty praise. But when someone exists outside of that matrix, it shatters their illusion. He doesn't play the game. He is the game. Nietzsche wasn't writing for the comfortable, the codependent, or the complacent. He was writing for the loners with fire in their chest. The ones who walk through the desert and come back less human, but more powerful. The Übermensch doesn't need your applause. He doesn't flinch at your silence. He doesn't mold himself to be liked. He conquers his own chaos, and lets the rest fall where it may. You've seen glimpses of that man inside yourself, when you stopped texting back. When you walked away from a toxic room and didn't explain. When you chose silence over groveling. That version of you was real. But you buried him. Because the world told you it was cold. Let me tell you something. Cold men don't get burned. Now lean in, because this is where most people flinch. But you won't. Because if you've made it this far, you're not like them. You don't want comfort. You want clarity, power, sovereignty. Good. Because the next insight is where it starts to hurt, but also where it starts to wake you up. See, the reason most people fear the self-reliant man isn't because he's cruel. It's because he reflects what they are too afraid to become. He's the mirror they can't look into. And when you carry that energy, you don't have to say a word. People feel it. They try to test you, push you, tame you. But nothing works. Because the man who doesn't need approval can't be blackmailed by rejection. You become the enigma, the wild card, the edge they can't file down. And that is what power feels like. But here's where the war begins, not outside but inside you. Because becoming this man, it's not a costume. It's not a mask. You don't fake detachment. You earn it, in silence, through the dark, when no one claps, no one texts, and you don't break. You bleed privately. You bury the version of you that begged. And when you rise, there's no applause. Just stillness. A brutal kind of peace. But in that stillness you realize something chilling. You never needed them. They needed your need. And now that it's gone, you've become unpredictable. You've become what they warned others about. You've become him. Now hold that feeling. Lock into it. Because what comes next is going to tear through every illusion you were raised with. We're about to go deeper. You still want this? Good. Because the next truth isn't just uncomfortable. It's dangerous. And most will turn back. But you're not most. You're ready to burn. They used to smile at you when you needed them. They liked you better when you were uncertain, confused, half-formed. The kind of person who paused before they spoke, who over-explained, who waited for permission to breathe. But the moment you began to change, when your silence became confidence, not fear, watch closely, they flinched. Because they didn't want the real you. They wanted the version of you that needed them to exist. And when that need disappeared, so did their loyalty. That's not friendship. That's emotional parasitism. And Nietzsche, he understood this decades before anyone dared to say it out loud. He wrote, "Invisible threads are the strongest ties." Meaning the chains that bind you are almost never visible. They're not insults. They're not bruises. They're expectations. The subtle cues. The sighs. The, "Are you okay?" when you start pulling away. The looks they give you when you stop entertaining their games. You feel it in your gut before you see it. The moment you stop being the dancing monkey, they tighten the leash. But here's the truth no one warned you about. The moment you become mentally sovereign, you become emotionally dangerous. Not to yourself, but to those who built their identity around controlling you. See, your compliance kept them safe. Your silence protected their illusion of dominance. And when you wake up, when you start choosing yourself without apology, they call you cold. They call you selfish. They call you toxic. What? Because you've just exited the emotional slave class, and they don't know how to deal with that. And here's what's even darker. Some people were only ever kind to you because you were weak. Let that sink in. Their softness was a strategy, not a trait. They were gentle until they realized you could walk alone. Then came the test, the accusations, the "you've changed" comments. Damn right you've changed. You stopped living off borrowed confidence. Now imagine what happens when you carry that energy into business, into dating, into your entire life. You become what Nietzsche envisioned, not a puppet in the circus but the architect of your own cathedral. Brutal, beautiful, sacred. But most people never make it that far. Because there's a cost. The cost is solitude, isolation. Those long nights where it's just you and your thoughts, and no applause, no affirmation, no one to prop up your self-worth. Just silence. But that silence? That's where kings are forged. Every empire begins in exile. And that brings us to another brutal truth, the one most people can't handle. You will terrify the insecure simply by existing. You won't have to raise your voice. You won't have to win an argument. You'll just be calm, grounded, unbothered. And that will enrage them. What? Because your emotional stillness reflects their inner chaos. And they hate you for it. You're not too quiet. You're not too intense. You're just not faking it anymore. And in a world addicted to image, authenticity is a nuclear weapon. The people who once loved you when you were lost, they won't recognize you now. Because you no longer orbit their needs. You've become your own gravity. Now let's talk about power. Real power. Not titles. Not fame. Not followers. Power is the ability to walk away from anything, from anyone, without looking back. That's the man Nietzsche wrote about. The man who doesn't beg the world to understand him. Who doesn't water himself down to be digestible. He's the man who walks through fire, not to impress, but to purify. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be free. And freedom? It doesn't come wrapped in comfort. It comes drenched in rejection, in betrayal, in nights where you doubt whether you'll ever feel understood again. But if you endure, if you hold the line, something wild happens. You stop craving peace with people who bring you war. You stop explaining yourself to people who benefit from your confusion. And the world, the fake, the manipulative, the emotionally entitled, it loses its grip on you. You're no longer hooked by praise. You're no longer crippled by silence. You're not swayed by gossip. You don't blink when they withhold affection. Because now, you've become the ghost in the machine. Unreachable. Uncontrolled. Alive in a way most people will never understand. Let me ask you something. When's the last time you made a decision without waiting for anyone's approval? When's the last time you walked away without a dramatic explanation? When's the last time you felt peace, not because someone gave it to you, but because you reclaimed it? That's the new addiction. That's the new high. Not attention, not applause, but indifference to both. And when that shift happens, when you break through that invisible wall, you don't just survive the manipulation. You dismantle it. Because the man who needs no one can't be played. And that's why he's feared. And that's why he's free. But there's one last transformation, one final abyss that most men never cross. Because it requires you to confront not just others, but your past self. You ready for that? Because the next part isn't just about protecting your power. It's about unleashing it. You're not meant to stay invisible. You're meant to dominate your reality without ever lowering your voice. And once you learn how to do that, they'll never forget you. Now you stand at the edge of something brutal, a truth so sharp it cuts through the lies you've told yourself for years. The man who doesn't need you isn't just untouchable because he's cold or distant. He's dangerous because he's mastered a secret that turns the world upside down. He controls himself. He's no longer a prisoner of emotions that used to drag him under. No longer a slave to approval or validation. This mastery? It's a war within, a relentless, bloody fight to strip away every false dependency, every crutch, every craving for comfort disguised as love. And when you cross that threshold, you aren't just free. You become the storm. Let me tell you what that looks like. Imagine walking into any room, business meetings, social circles, family gatherings, and carrying a presence so magnetic, so lethal in its calm that people pause. Not because you said something clever. Not because you screamed the loudest. But because your silence commands respect. That's the transformation Nietzsche spoke of, the emergence of the Übermensch, the Overman. He doesn't ask for space. He takes it. He doesn't seek allies. He creates them. He doesn't bend to others' wills. He bends reality around his own. And you, if you're willing, can become that man. But there's a final dark twist. The danger isn't just that you don't need others. It's that in not needing them, you stop fearing their rejection. You stop chasing their approval. And suddenly, the world is your playground. Now they might call you arrogant. They might whisper you're selfish. They'll accuse you of being cold. Good. Because that means you've broken free. You've shredded the chains that kept you dependent, needy, and vulnerable. You've become a fortress in a world that preys on weakness. But here's the secret most never admit. True power is terrifying, not because it destroys others, but because it frees you from destruction. When you no longer need anyone to validate your existence, no one can hurt you by withholding it. You become untouchable. You become a force of nature. And with that force comes responsibility. Because power without direction is chaos. You don't use your independence to isolate yourself in bitterness. You use it to create a new reality, one where you call the shots. Where your will is law. Where your presence alone shifts the balance. You're no longer the prey. You're the hunter. The strategist. The one who sees the battlefield before the war begins. You don't just survive the game, you rewrite the rules. And here's the part no one talks about. This transformation isn't about becoming heartless. It's about becoming whole. You embrace your darkness. You own your solitude. You command your chaos. And in doing so, you transcend the endless cycle of need and rejection. Because the man who doesn't need you has transcended the illusion of connection. He's tapped into a deeper truth. That the only approval that matters is his own. And when you live that truth, you become unstoppable. You become immortal, not in body but in spirit. Your legacy isn't built on others' fleeting affection. It's built on your unbreakable will. You don't need to be liked. You don't need to be understood. You just need to be you. And that, my friend, is the most dangerous thing in the world. Now feel that power. On it. Because the final part will bring this fire home, will seal your transformation, and leave you standing taller than ever before. Are you ready to claim what's yours? They'll never tell you this, but the man who doesn't need you, he is everything they secretly wish they were. And everything they were taught to fear. Because his power isn't noise. It isn't performance. It's the kind of silent danger that threatens every lie society built to keep you obedient. He's the glitch in the system. The ghost in the algorithm. The wolf who walked away from the pack, and thrived. He doesn't scream for attention, because the moment he enters the room, attention finds him. He doesn't beg to be seen, because those who truly see, don't chase visibility. And that, right there, is your final initiation. You were raised in a world that sedated your fire. They told you that needing others was noble. That dependence was connection. That sacrificing your truth was the price of love. But Nietzsche ripped the curtain down. He said, you have your way. I have my way. As for the right way, the correct way, and the only way, it does not exist. This is the death of their God. The birth of yours. No savior is coming. No one's handing you power. And no, you don't get to stay comfortable and win. You become power by standing alone, by walking away, by choosing the self over the swarm. This isn't rebellion. It's resurrection. But let's be clear, this path has a price. You will lose people. You will lose the illusions that once gave you comfort. You may even lose parts of yourself that were never yours to begin with. But what you gain? You gain a mind that cannot be manipulated, a heart that cannot be toyed with, a spine that does not bend at the first sign of rejection. You gain solitude without sadness, independence without bitterness, ambition without apology. You gain sovereignty. And that's what they fear most. A man who doesn't need to be told who he is. A man who knows, who decides, who becomes. He doesn't cling. He chooses. He doesn't follow. He builds. He doesn't threaten. His presence is the threat. That is you now. You are not the version of yourself they molded. You are the version you forged in silence, under pressure, in the shadows. The one that doesn't need applause to know he's won. The one who smiles when they misunderstand him, because he no longer needs to be understood. He needs nothing. And so, he can do anything. This is your power. This is your danger. You were never meant to blend in. You were never meant to kneel. You were born to command, to confront, to create. Let them label you cold. Let them call you arrogant. Let them try to shame the steel in your eyes. Because deep down, they know the truth. The man who doesn't need them is the man they'll never forget. And now you carry that legacy. Not because you were chosen, but because you chose yourself. So breathe deep. Let go of the chains. And walk like you've already won. Because you have. You're not here to beg for crumbs anymore. You're here to build the kingdom. And it starts now. If this woke something up in you, then don't keep it locked away. Comment what hit you hardest. Like if you feel the shift. Subscribe if you're done playing small. And keep watching because this is just the beginning. There are darker truths. Deeper awakenings. Greater wars ahead. But now you're ready. Because the man who doesn't need them is already 10 steps ahead. And you are becoming him.